Hey, Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Mem Aleph in Sota. As we learn for Shlema, for Elazar ben Reuma, for Yosef Ezriel ben Chai Michal, who were severely injured 2 years ago in the tragedy in the Rome. 45 people were killed, and these two are still suffering with terrible head injuries. May they have a Shlema. Says the Mishnah, Parshas HaMelech Ketzad. We call this hakel. The pasuk is hakel. What does that mean? That the king gathers together the people, all the people that come to Jerusalem, and when they do this, we'll see. And he reads for them from the Sefer Dvarim. Parshas HaMelech Ketzad. Motzei Yontav Rishon Shel Chag, the end of the first day of Sukkot. That's Chag. And Motzei Yontav B'Shmini, and the 8th. And what do you mean the 8th? It sounds like the 8th day of the Sukkot. We just said the first Yontav Rishon. So we'll see it means really the 8th year, B'Masoi Shvias, after Shemitah. In other words, Shemitah is every 7 years. After the Shemitah year, in the 8th year, beginning of the 8th year, not at Rosh Hashanah, but Motzei Yontav of Sukkot, of the first day of Sukkot, Oslam Bima Shalaitz. They construct a large platform made out of wood, the Azara, in the Azara. We'll see that they didn't do this if it came out on Shabbos, only if it came out middle of the week, because they couldn't construct the bima on Shabbos, and to do it the day before, there's not enough room in the base in the Azara, so they only did it like temporarily when they did Hakel. And they constructed this platform, and the king sat there. That's the pasuk says in Dvarim, in Vayoch Beketzer, at the end of 7 years, B'moed in the Yontif. We'll see the pasuk goes on to detail Matzoi Shvias, it's at the end of Shemitah, and it says B'moed. It says all these words. Why does it? It seems a little verbose. The Gemara will explain. What do they do? Chazan Knesset again. The Shamas would take the Sefer Torah, like we saw by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. The Shamas takes Sefer Torah Rosh Knesset. He gives it to the Gabbai. Rosh Knesset Skan. He gives it to the Skan. Skan Nosel Kohen Gadol. That's what all that was the same we had on Yom Kippur. But now the Kohen Gadol knows to Lamelech, he gives it to the king. Lamelech Omed stands in Makabel, and he receives the Sefer Torah. But when he reads it, he could sit down, because the regular king was from Malchus Beis David, and he's allowed to sit in the Azara. We'll see what happened exactly, if this was in the Azara or in the Ezras Nashim. Agrippas HaMelech, when he was the king, he was from the Malchei Chashmonon, wasn't from the Davidic dynasty, and in fact he was known to be from Hurdus. He was his ancestor, even though he had a Jewish mother, but his ancestry was of Hurdus. So he was really an Eved. Ahmad the Kibel, he stood up, and when he was the king, he stood and received to accept the Torah. But Kara Omed, as opposed to reading it sitting down, he read standing up. And the Chachamim praised him for this. We'll see that the Chacham word fault for praising him. When he came to the Parsha, and as we'll see, they read throughout the different portions in Sefer Dvarim, which is Mishnah Torah, because Mishnah Torah Zos. They only read from Dvarim, which is called Mishnah Torah. When he came to the section in Shoftim where it says you can't don't make yourself a king, Ish Nachri, who's a foreigner, right? Zolglein of Dmos. His eyes flowed with tears, because he realized, well, he is an Ish Nachri, right? So he said, really, he's not a proper king. Amrlo Altasher, because they said, Agrippas, don't be afraid. Achenu ata, you are our brother. Right? Achenu ata, you are our brother. No worries, you're our brother. And that was considered flattery, as we'll see. The Koreh, what does he read? Metchila Ezel, he calls from beginning of Eil Dvarim. That means from the book of Dvarim, Mishnah Torah. Ad Shema, until Kriya Shema, Shema Vayim Shemoah. And then he reads Shema and Vayim Shemoah. Answer Tasri says all these parshas. We'll see Rashi expands on this to explain what the different parshas in Dvarim that he read. He's Chalal Aser, and then he reads the parsha of when you finish taking Trumas Maisrus, talks about that. Uparshas HaMelech, and he reads the Parsha HaMelech, who talks about putting a king. This is what we said. Agrippas was crying when he read this portion. Ubrachas B'Klolos, and he reads the Brachas B'Klolos we talked about the other day, the brachas and clothes, which is part of the brisas, the covenants that Hashem made with Israel. Ad shekamer kol parsha, till he finishes the entire parsha that we have to read in Dvarim. Bracha shekain gadol mavarach osan. That we said after the on Yom Kippur, we learned that when the Kohen Gadol finishes all the avoda and he says the various tefillos, he finishes with like a Shmon Esrei sort of a davening, and it says there 8 brachas that he said. That's what he learned yesterday. That after he reads the various parshas, he does the avoda and reads the various parshas in Vayikra, and then he reads the parsha in Pinchas. Then he says it's sort of like a Shmon Esrei at the end, which has 8 brachas. So it says the same brachas that the Kohen Gadol does on Yom Kippur. Brachas Kohen Gadol brachas Hamelech also brachas. As the king says the same 8 brachas with one exception. El Shenosin Shavagolim Tachas Mechilas Oven. Mechilas Oven is obviously apropos to Yom Kippur. Here he puts in the bracha of Regolim, Mekadosh Yisrael Vazman. He puts that bracha in instead of the Mechilas Oven. Otherwise, the other brachas are the same that the Kohen Gadol does on Yom Kippur. So the Gemara first asks, what do you mean by Shmini? Sounds like on the 8th day of Sukkot, right? What do you mean by Shmini? Sakadaitach, can it mean that? We know it doesn't mean that. It says, Matzah Yom, he said, Matzah Yom Tabrishan Shalchai. Ema B'Shminis, in the 8th year. Why does the Parsha go through all that detail? Right? The Parsha there talks about Matzah, after it makes a Shemitah, and it says a Shmini. It goes through all these details. But Moed talks about the holiday. Why does it mention all these things? Why don't you just say, the beginning of the 8th year? Why can't it be all simple? We need all because if we just say Miketz Sheva Shanim, Avimina Nimnu Mehashti, you start counting from right now. Or Miketz, what's the lashon in the? It says Miketz Sheva Shanim b'Moed. That makes it Miketz Sheva Shanim 7 years from now. Meaning, when was this said? This was said before they came into Eretz Yisrael and Arbas Moab at the end of 40 years sojourn in the Midbar. So Hashem said to them, listen, at the end of 7 years, you should have Hakel and the king should read from the Sefer Torah. So you might think you start from right now. Because there's no Shemitah there. Why? Because they didn't start counting Shemitahs in Yovel until they were 14 years in Israel, after they conquered the country for 7 years and divided it up for 7 years. So and only at that point did they start counting Shemitah. But if we just say Miketz, I might think, well, right now you're about to come into Eretz Yisrael. 7 years from now, do it. So I might think that's what it means. Because Rachmana Shemitah, it says Shemitah, it's got to be after Shemitah. Because Rachmana Shemitah, having in the Sof Shemitah, I might think it's the end of the 7th year. The end of the 7th year Shemitah, or at the end of the year, right before Rosh Hashanah, that's when you do a cycle. Because Rachmana B'Moed, only in the holiday. Because the first day of the year is also a holiday. It's called Rosh Hashanah. Everything there, because Rachmana B'Chag Asuka. So it says Chag Asuka. It's got to be Chag because Rachmana B'Chag Asuka. Even the last day, Shmini Atzeres is also considered part of Sukkot because Rachmana B'Vo Kol Yisrael, when they all come to Yerushalayim, what does it mean? Maschalta the Moed, the beginning of the Moed. So that's why he has to tell. That's why the pasuk enumerates all these details. Miketz Shavashanim, but it's got to be Shema. It can't be at the end of 7 years from right now, from your entry into Eretz Yisrael. It's got to be after a Shemitah. And if there's a Shemitah, it's not the end of the Shemitah year, but it's rather in Yantif. And it's not Rosh Hashanah, it's Chag HaSukkos. And you shouldn't think it's the end of Chag HaSukkos, which is Shmini Atzeres, but rather it's when they first come in, end of the first day of Sukkot. Now Rashi on here, before we actually turn the page, which we just did, Rashi says, take a look in Rashi, Rashi in the wide lines, in the first of the wide lines, and you read there, in other words, he doesn't read the whole Sefer Dvarim. He also skips around. Mushamet say he first reads beginning of Eilad Dvarim until Shema, which is Naschanan, and then Vayim Shema. Now Vayim Shema is in Ekev, right? So after he reads Shema, which is in Vaschanan, he skips Ayidei Diluk. Then he skips Aser Taser, Michael, which is where in Re'eh, right? The next Sedra. Then he reads Kischala when you finish taking Meiser, etc. Ubrachos v'kvalos. Then he reads Brachos v'kvalos, which is not exactly the order that we saw in the Mishnah. Here the Rashi differs from the Rambam and he holds that it's not exactly the order that was written in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says all the things that he reads, but it's not necessarily in that order, right? Because it says, the Mishnah, we said that he reads first, then he reads, doesn't tell you exactly, so the Mishnah doesn't say exactly the order. It says afterwards, it says, does say the order, and then brachas eklolos. But Rashi turns it around. Rashi says, no, you read the brachas eklolos after aser to aser. So Rashi changes the order of the Mishnah. He says, then you go back, then he reads the parsha of Asim Melech, which is in Shoftim. Right? Now, what's the order for that? What's the reason for these parashas that he reads? Rashi says, Shema is Kabbalah Malchus Shemaim, Kabbalah Ol Malchus Shemaim. Vayim Shema is Kabbalah Ol Mitzvahs, as we know. Kadavar Perek and Brachas. V'chein Brachas V'Klolos is also Kabbalah's brises, accepting the brises. That's accepting the covenants. So that's all read together. Umashmiel Rabim Aser to Aser. Then he tells you, Aser to Aser Kis Chalal Aser Neshu Zman Aser. It's a time of gathering, Sukkah's time, when he's telling you to gather in all the harvests and give Umatanas Aniyim and give all the proper gifts that you're supposed to do, Meiser, Umatanas Aniyim, Bafashas Tumas and Meisers. The Afalpi, Rashi goes on in the fourth of the wide lines. Afpi Shem Parshas HaMelech Mafsekes Bein Aser Le Kischala, even though the Parsha Melech in Shoftim separates between Aser to Aser, which is in Re'eh, and Kischala. Where's Kischala, Michael? Is that in Kiseitse? I think so, right? Korias Eli Yachad. He reads the parsha of Aser to Aser and Kischala together, because it's one inyan, it's masas. Yachkach, and then he reads parsha Melech. He goes back. In other words, even though he said normally you don't go back in reverse order like we saw yesterday reading. Here he does go back. It's not a regular kriya. It's a hakel. The imi shum diesh kan dilig b'torah. You're skipping around. Even though we said yesterday that if you shouldn't skip so much so that the translator will finish his translation, and then there's a hefsek. Even though you have that problem over here, he says, well, there's no targument anyway. So unfortunately, explain, what do you mean there's no targument anyway? If there's no translator anyway, then there's certainly a break, right? If he's skipping around. So unfortunately, explain like this, that since the king doesn't have a translator, the Kohen Gadol does. When they regularly read laning every week, there's a translator. But the king doesn't have a translator. Therefore, there's always going to be a break. When he's skipping from Parsha to Parsha, from Vaschanan to Akif, from Akif to Rei, there's always going to be some sort of a break. So there's a break anyway, so it's not so bad if he jumps forward and then goes backward. Why? It's better to have all the inyanim of Trumas Maisros, like Aser to Aser and Kisachala, all talking about Matanas Ladiyim and Trumas Maisros, put that all together and then go back and read and read the Parsha again, even though there is a break, but there's going to be a break anyway. So there's a little break anyway, you can make a break this way. Right? That's what Rashi explains. That's important to understand the order here. All right, we're at the top of the days now. The Chazan gets again. The Shamas takes the Sefer Torah and gives it to the Gabbai. The same question we had yesterday by the Kohen Gadol. If you're taking out the Sefer Torah to give it eventually to the king, why are you giving it to these other people in between? Seems like you're giving kavod to a Talmud even when there's somebody greater than him, his rabbi. Amar Abaya, Kol Mishim Kvara Melech, like we saw yesterday by the Kohen Gadol, it's all because of kavod for the king, by passing it on from one up the ladder, Shamas to Gabbai, Gabbai to Skan to Kohen Gadol, and then to the king. That's all honoring the king. The king accepts the Torah standing, and then he sits. Agrippus didn't sit down. And as he stood up and accepted the Torah, and then instead of sitting down, which a normal king, a Davidic king, would be able to, he stood. Omed, so it says over here, Hamelech Omed umakabel v'kora Yoshe. What do you mean Omed? Omed mechal Yoshe. He's sitting. V'mamar ein shiul bazar el malcha b'stav dofad. So what do you mean over here? Grievous Hamelech Omad stood up. That means he was sitting. Okay, he did when he read it. When he accepted the Torah, he stood up, and then when he read it, he actually stood up, as we'll see, which a Davidic king wouldn't have to. But over here, the fact that Agrippa stood up, it's mashma that he was sitting. The only ones who are allowed to sit in the Azara are Davidic kings, as we saw in the pasuk yesterday, in the same pasuk is quoted. He was allowed to. Hashem allowed him to sit. Hashem gave them that special, special what? Dispensation. Good word. Special dispensation. He was allowed to sit. Why? As we saw yesterday, I said to show that his malchus was complete. That Hashem agreed. That Hashem, so to speak, blessed his dominion over the Jewish people. So that was a special case. And here Agrippus was not from the Davidic dynasty. As Rav Chisda said before by the Kohen Gadol, Bezras Nashim, that the Kohen Gadol also, where did he read? He read in the Bezras Nashim. That's where he sat and got up. The same thing, Hachanai Bezras Nashim. Here we're talking about he was in the Bezras Nashim. Agrippus, when he sat, he wasn't in the Azar, he was in the Bezras Nashim, which didn't have the same kedusha as the Azar itself. Now, Agrippus HaMelech was, if he was in the Bezras Nashim, he could have sat also when he read the Sefer Torah. He was supposed to stand when he receives it, but when he read it, he could have sat, and he didn't. He stood up, and they praised him. Shaphu Machlal, the shaper of it. Why would he do that? In other words, the proper thing is, okay, he was the king. He wasn't the Davidic king, and he wasn't allowed to sit in the Azar, but he didn't sit in the Azar. He was in the Ezras Nashim, as we just said. So over here, what did he do, though? He said, even though I'm allowed to sit as the king when I read the Sefer Torah, right? I'm allowed to sit when I read the Sefer Torah because he was in the Ezras Nashim. He stood up anyway. Even if you hold that a Jewish ruler, either a ruler of a tribe or a ruler who wasn't actually a king, or a Rosh Sanhedrin was also called Nasi at the times when there wasn't the Melech. Even if you hold that a Nasi is allowed to forego his honor, he's allowed to. Nasi Shemachal Kvodo, he's allowed to forego. Melech Shemachal Kvodo ain't Kvodo. A king is not allowed to forego his honor because it ruins the covenant of the king. It ruins that he doesn't have the fear of the king. You should surely put upon yourself a king. His fear, his awe should be upon you. In other words, you're not allowed to act like it. If you're the monarch, you're supposed to put that crown on your head and act like a king. Not like a wimp. You're not supposed to. I'm Michael. I don't need anything. No, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to forego your honor because it's diminishing the honor of the whole Jewish people if the king's honor is diminished. So so how was he allowed to stand when he should have shown that he was the king and sat since it wasn't the Azar? The answer is mitzvah shana. If he's doing a mitzvah, then this honor is ignored. When he's doing a mitzvah, you don't have to be concerned about his honor because the mitzvah takes more precedence, and he wanted to do the mitzvah in the best way that he felt. When it came to the point of when he read the parsha of the Melech in Shoftim, where it talks about if you want to make a king, make yourself a king, but don't make a king who is a foreigner, a non-Jewish person. So it says over there that he started crying. Agrippa started crying because he felt he really wasn't a legitimate king. And they said, don't worry, you're our brother. That was considered flattery because he wasn't really their brother, even though technically he was Jewish because his mother was Jewish, but he also, according to some, he was simply an Eved. There's a shiloh whether an Eved or a Goy who lives with a Jewish woman, we all Lamais, I think that he's Jewish, but some say that he's still considered like an Eved. So Tanamish Veder of Nasim Bosha at that time, the Jews deserved destruction because of the flattery. They flattered him, and flattery is false. Flattery is improper. From the time that the flattery became very strong, the kochos, right? People started flattering. The judgments were perverted, right? The judgment were perverted. Conduct was totally deteriorated because everybody was lying and saying this is good, that's not good. And then it says not only flattery, it's not only for others saying, oh, you did a nice job when you didn't do it. I should it's even for themselves. So there was no truth. It's like, I did a great job. They liked him, yeah, they liked him, but he wasn't really he wasn't a Davidic king, right? He wasn't really from the tribe. some miskalkul amasim. So once flattery became very strong among the Jewish people, so everything became perverted and destroyed. Miskalkul amasim, conduct deteriorated. So people couldn't even say what I did is better than you did. What everybody did is it's all lies anyway. Rashi says, since they didn't scold the sinners, people followed them. Everybody was over Averis because they never, instead of telling a person who did wrong, you did wrong, they said, no, you did good. So good and bad became one and the same. Rav Meir Shapiro said, you're allowed to flatter evildoers, the wicked in this world. They won't call the vile person anymore. In other words, loss of level. Yeshua is talking about loss of level. They won't anymore call the vile person a generous person. They will not call, Rashi says, calls an afshi, guy who wants to drink all the time, drink wine, he's a glutton. They won't call him anymore a noble person. They won't call him, but in this world, they do call him that. You can call even a person who's vile and disgusting, you can call him, oh, he's a lovely person, he's generous, he's a noble person. You're allowed to. So he learned, not like, obviously this contradicts what we just said before. We said before that from the time that flattery became very predominant, so everything is deteriorated, everything is perverted. There's no right and wrong. But Rav Shimon Pasi says you're allowed to flatter Rishon in this world, because in the next world there won't be any more. It's in this world it's okay. It says Kiros Pnei Elokim B'Tetzeni. What did Yaakov tell Esav? Oh, he was trying to be nice to me. He was trying to pacify him so that he wouldn't kill him. So he said, oh, when I see your face, it's like I see the face of an angel or of God, and you were nice to me. So Smashma, he flattered Esav. So it's mashma from these things that you're allowed to flatter a sham in this world. Rav Levi, this disagrees with Rav Levi. Levi doesn't hold you're allowed to, and he learns that whole story differently. Rav Levi, Mashal Yaakov Esav, with this dialogue between Yaakov and Esav, that Yaakov apparently flattered Esav. He said, "Oh, you look like you. It's like seeing an angel of God." What's the compromise? Reuben invited Shimon over to eat. When Shimon started eating there, he saw that Reuben was really entrapping him, that he wanted to kill him. So Amarlo, so Shimon, to try to defend himself, Amarlo, Tam Tafshel Zeh Shani Toim. This chicken over here that I'm eating of yours, this tastes like the chicken I ate over at Buckingham Palace, that I ate over at the king's house. It's to show him that I'm Karav Lamalchus, I'm a friend of the king. So Amar. So therefore, when Reuben heard that, Yadalei Malka, he knows the king knows him, the king knows him. Mustafa Bilakotli, he said it in order not to kill him. In other words, the reason he said that is that I'm friendly with God, as if to say that don't fool around with me, you're going to be in trouble. So that's what he said over here too. He wasn't trying to flatter Esav, he was trying to hint to him that that he has powerful friends and he shouldn't kill him. Amar Rabbi Elazar, whoever has flattery, maybe aflo, and brings anger to the world. Shneimar, those who are flattery of the heart will bring or will cause anger. His prayers will not be heard. Shneimar, when they're suffering, they will not cry out, because their crying out won't help. Rashi says, their crying won't help out, so they won't cry. It won't cry because it won't help for them. So you see here, even though there were opinions, it seems that the more predominant opinion is that flattery is a terrible thing. And even if when you flatter a sham, it's obviously maybe only to save yourself. You're trying to, keep them from harming you. Whoever has flattery in him, whoever speaks flattery, even unborn fetuses, so curse him. You curse a person who speaks flattery. He tells a Russia, you are a righteous person. The nations will curse him. And the nations will be angry at him. Right? The ein kov el kol. A kov refers to a curse. Nemar lo kavo kel. Who said that? Bilam, right? He says, what ma kov lo kavo. When I want to curse, God doesn't want to curse. So yibu ama means cursing, right? If you say a Russia, you are righteous, you're flattering him. That person who does the flattery, the flatterer, will be cursed by the nation because the bu amin means it's like the lashon of lo kavo kel. Bein laom ella ubrin. Laom, which means nations, also means fetuses. Shenemar ulaom ilaom yamatz. Right? When Rivka had the twins inside Yaakov and Esav, right? What Hashem tell them? Laom ilaom of one nation will be stronger than the other, referring to fetuses. So even fetuses will curse a flatterer. Whoever has flattery in him, Nofa began will fall into hell. Shenemar, woe to those who say that bad is good or tov ra. They mix up good and bad, bad and good. That's their flatterer. Maksabach would say afterwards, Lachain, therefore, ka'achal kash lashon eish, just like straw is burned up by the tongue of fire, v'chashash lahava yirpa, and chaff is also consumed by flames, just like it's easy for fire to consume, dry straw and stubble. The same way he will also be destroyed and will go to Gehenna. Whoever flatters somebody else, you flatter him in order, maybe to protect yourself if he's going to harm you, but at the end you'll fall into his hands. It's not going to help you to flatter him. At the end you'll fall into his hands. The main enough will be if you don't fall into his hands, you'll fall into the hands of his sons, of the flattery. If you don't fall into the son's hands, you'll fall into the grandson's hands. In other words, if you flatter somebody, you will eventually fall prey to them. If not them, their sons. If not them, their grandsons. It says, Chananya had given false prophecy. Bad guy. He said, Nebuah Sheker. Chananya said, it's all going to be over soon. And Yirmiyah said to Chananya, Amen, Kain Yas Hashem. So Hashem Yakum Hashem Esvorach. Hashem should fulfill your words. Now, normally, if that would be a prayer, it's like Halavai, wish the Gula should come soon. That wouldn't be so bad. But the way he said it as flattery. And instead of admonishing him and saying, where did you get that prophecy from? It's fake. So Yirmiyah flattered Chananya. It says afterwards, Vayihi hu b'shar Binyamin. Later on, afterwards, after several days, Yirmiyah was leaving Yerushalayim to go to Eretz Binyamin, and he came to the gate of Binyamin to divide up a nachla that he had received. And Vayihu b'shar Binyamin, b'sham bal pkudos, and there was an officer there, an officer of the district, Ushmo, and what his name was, Yiriyah. His name was Yiriyah ben Shalamiah ben Chananya. He was the grandson of Chananya. That's what we're talking about over here. Chananya was the one that Yirmiyah had flattered, and we said that if you flatter somebody, you'll fall into his hands. If not his hands, his sons. If not his grandsons. Well, Yiriyah was the grandson of Chananya. Vayitpos as Yirmiyah, he grabbed him. As Yirmiyah Navi Lamor, Elakasma Nafi, you're going to fall into the hands of the Kasdim. Vayom Yirmiyah Sheker, not true. And any of Elakasdim, not the specific. After it says Vayispos as Yirmiyahu, and that says Vayispos Yiriyah ben Shalmaya, Yirmiyahu, Vayaviyahu Elasar, brought him to the officers. So he'll fall into the hands. So not a good idea. Even great people like Yirmiyah also committed flattery, and they were punished for that. And that's when flattery is definitely not a good thing. Any congregation, any people that has flattery, Ma'usa Kanida is as repulsive as a menstruate woman. Shnemar, Ki Adas Chanaf Galmud, because the congregation of flattery is Galmud. Now, what does Galmud mean? Shekem Bekir Chayam, in the overseas cities, Korin Nida Galmuda. They call Nida Galmuda because Galmuda, my Galmuda, what does it mean? Gemula Mibala, she's separated from her husband. So Galmuda means like a lashon of separated, somebody who is like, so to speak, ostracized. So Kias Chanav Galmuda will be separated and ostracized. So that's the idea here, that whoever a congregation that has flattery is as repulsive as a nida and will be ostracized. Any congregation that has chanufa, Lusof Gola will go into exile at the end. It says, says the nation, the congregation that has flattery is Galmud, as we said, that's separate. The Amarto B'Vavcha, you'll say in your heart, Mi Alad Li'asela, who gave me these children? Vani Shchula, I am bereaved, V'Galmuda, and I'm separated. Gola, exiled, Vasura, and wandering. So you see that not only will people who flatter be separated from the congregation, be ostracized, but they'll also go into exile. Amar B'Amar Baba, Arba Kitos, Ein Mekabim Pnei Shechina. There are 4 groups of kinds of people that will never encounter the countenance of Hashem. They will not be Mekabel Shechina. They will not be Zocha to see the salvation of Hashem. One is Katzleitzim. Number 1, talking about people who are cynics, people who make fun of everything. The Katchanifim, and the group, the class of flatterers. The Kas Shkarm, those who lie, Shakranim should be the Girsa. The Kat Masapar Lashon Hara, those who slander others, those who speak Lashon Hara, evil tongue. Kas Leisim, how do we know? It's all based on Psukim. The Siv says, Mashach Yado Eslotzim, Hashem drew his hand away from the cynics. He takes away his hand, so they will never become Hashem doesn't want to see them. Kaschani, from the class of flatterers, the Siv, Ki lo lefanav chanaf yavo. A flatterer will not come before God. Hashem doesn't want to be near him. Kachgarim, those who lie. The class like the Siv, it says, Dober shkarim, those who speak falsehoods, lo yiko leneged, they will not dwell before me. So again, God will separate himself and not have any of these people there. Kant Masapar Lashon Hara, the group of people who speak Lashon Hara, the Pasuk says, Ki lo el chafetz resha ata, you are not a God who wants evil. Lo yagur chara, ra will not dwell with you. And that's the Pasuk. And the drush is, Sadik Hashem, you are righteous. Lo yagur b'mugur chara. If you are righteous in your dwelling place, in your abode, there can't be any evil. And Rashi tells us, the last Rashi in the parak, Lo yagur im chara, evil cannot dwell with you. We got Mesapar Lashon Hara, and speaking about Lashon Hara, the Bahu Parsha, Ki ein befiu nechona. In his mouth, there's nothing correct. And it's speaking about people who speak falsely. Hashem will not have them in his abode. So we see that all these 4 groups of people, whether they're cynics or flatterers or liars or people who slander others, and Lashon Hara could be, he says shakranim. Shakranim is one. Lashon Hara is another thing. Lashon Hara is usually the truth, right? If it's a lie, it's a lie. Lashon Hara is generally referring to speaking the truth, even if it's the truth. If it's a lie, that's a lie. Lashon Hara is, it's the truth, but you shouldn't be speaking about other people, period. All those kinds of people will not dwell with Hashem. Now, the last, tomorrow Mishnah will start the parak Meshuach Muchama, and the last parak is Egla Rufa. As we'll finish Mishnah a week from tomorrow, we finish the Masechet, and Meshuach Muchama, all this and Egla Rufa, the last 2 prakim are really continuations of the first Mishnah back on Lamed Beis in this parak, because there we talked about things that you could say only things that you could say in the vernacular, and things that must be said in Lashon HaKodesh. And we talked about Bikurim, Chalitza, Brachas Apollos, Brachas Kohen, Brachas Kohen Gadol. Yesterday we had Brachas Kohen Gadol. Today we had Brachas HaMelech. And then Parshas Egla Rufa and Meshuach Muchama. Right? So it says Parshas Egla Rufa and Meshuach Muchama, but the order in our Masechet is that Meshuach Muchama comes first. In other words, this is really a continuation of our parak, even though this is a separate parak. The 8th and 9th prakim are listed separately in the Masechet, but they're really continuation from the Mishnah of the 7th parak, the Mishnah of the 7th parak, which talks about what are the things that have to be said in Hebrew, Parshas Egla Rufa and Meshuach Muchama. Okay, and then he goes on to explain what they are. So he explained the other ones. Now we have a separate parak that explains Meshuach Muchama, and then we'll have the last parak explaining Egla Rufa, and then we'll complete the Masechet Meretz Hashem. So get your Gemara getting ready, which will begin in Meretz Hashem a week from tomorrow. Okay, have a good day, everybody.